Well, let's talk about that really quickly too. Just like China has always been such a creative team building region. I feel like there's a lot that specifically like the Jolly Brayloom group has always brought to the table when it's been at US regionals or otherwise. But I feel like Rafa Busutil is going to be a very tough opponent in this matchup. You have a lot of just very nice pieces when it comes down to some of the bulk that is existing on this team, like Heatran, Dondozo. I feel like even Rillaboom in its own right can either be a little bit bulky with the Assault Vest or also just a big offensive threat. But I'm really drawn to the Baxcalibur and the Roaring Moon that are on this team.
Yeah, like you said, it's really it is kind of just bulky offense embodied. Once again, a little bit limited on the speed control. We do have that tailwind on the Roaring Moon. Roaring Moon, though, going to be rocking a little bit more of a supportive set than the one we saw earlier. This one's going to be running Breaking Swipe, Knockoff, Tailwind, and Protect. And the Baxcalibur, no Ninetales to support it. We did see Ninetales Baxcalibur picking up a little bit about a month ago, but this one is actually running a Focus Sash, which is a really interesting item to have on the backs. It has really, really good natural bulk, but with the rise of Golden Goes in recent months and weeks, I guess it does make sense to at least let the Baxcalibur guarantee a survival into like a Make It Rain or something.
I think that it would make a lot of sense, and even still, maybe you're able to use the Focus Sash to just kind of like hang on. If you get like a thermal exchange boost and you're able to make use of that in some way for like an Ice Shard for the next turn, or you've already gotten a big Icicle Crash off. Either way, I think that this Baxcalibur could prove to be a really unique piece in this matchup, especially taking a look at the other side. We've got Bingjie Wang here for Team China that is going to be bringing this very creative team of the Cresselia, the Hisui and Gudra, and of course some of those fan favorites of the Urshifu, the Fluttermane, Chiyu, and Rillaboom.
What, you mean Gudra Cresselia core isn't a fan favorite?
That is
This
a fantasy
is
core and a half if I've ever seen one.
Yeah, Gudra Cresselia. I have a fair bit of experience running these two Pokemon as well. It has seen a reasonable amount of success in NA. Not a ton, but the Noah Pilo has been running Cresselia Gudra for most of Regulation E. He started the format pretty strong, and Yuki Zaninovich has also been running Hisui and Gudra. I don't remember if his team has Cresselia on it, but Gudra has been in and out of tournaments. We've seen it on stream a couple of times.
Hmm.
It is a good Pokemon, and it is a very difficult Pokemon to break, especially for a player like Rafa, who is running a bit of a slower team. It's not really packing those one-hit KO moves. It's going to be tough to break this Gudra, especially when you factor in healing from grassy terrain, leftovers, and potential lunar blessing on this
I
Cresselia.
don't want to think about it, only
Well, you're going to
because
have to think about
well, it's because I've been there before, and I've seen and I've been against and I've dealt with what Hisui and Gudra can bring to the table, especially when not only are you looking at the healing opportunities here to make sure that Hisui and Gudra is healthy, but also the fact that it has acid armor and it has body press. And it just has a lot of different ways to even become an offensive threat after you've let it sit on the field for long enough. So, can't wait to see what's going to happen in this very first game of this match. We've got China versus Spain, and Spain has all of the pride on the line right now when it comes to this matchup, as China just wants to continue through with the momentum that they've generated already during this week. So, for Bingjie, we are going to end up seeing the Urshifu and the Chiyu, and for Rafa, it will be the Dondozo and the Fluttermane.
First things to note, worth pointing out as well, we did see the team sheets there, but I don't know if we mentioned it. This is a solo Dondozo team. The Dondozo is here as a yawn spammer, a Mon that can just kind of sit on the field, apply decent pressure with Wave Crash and Heavy Slam, but Yawn, of course, can force that revolving door of Pokemon that you mentioned a little bit earlier. And something else that's worth noting is that this is a Choice Specs Fluttermane, but that HP stat is very high. That Fluttermane is very bulky.
So it's able to sit there with the bulk because you know that the Choice Specs is going to be taking over just a little bit of that special attack output. So able to move some of those EVs into just a little bit of a different training, but you're just going to see it leave the field immediately. Doesn't want to have to deal with any of the smoke that's being offered from the Urshifu or the Chiyu, and instead this Roaring Moon going to end up taking its place. We're going to see that photosynthesis boost will be speed, as it's just a little bit of a safer play here from Bingjie's Urshifu too.
Yeah, we also have a ton of HP on that Roaring Moon. It takes that overheat like it's nothing, and that is a resisted move, but it's still a Chi-Yu Beads of Ruin overheat boosted by the Light Orb. Don Dozo's going to follow this up with a Wave Crash, and that's already a KO for Rafa. Talked a little bit about how Rafa's team, it's not the team that's going super hyper offensive, but even still, already one KO. A big piece in Bingjie's Chi-Yu has been removed.
I mean, that Chiyu was just a little bit of a small fish in a big pond, I think. That Dondozo really proving its worth as the big boss, the big kahuna, but, it's now gonna have to deal with a different threat, and that's going to be this Rillaboom, not only setting the grassy terrain, but now this Rillaboom also has access to something like that priority grassy glide, and in this position, like, Rafa kinda needs to make a choice. This is, again, as you mentioned, a Roaring Moon that does not have access to something like acrobatics. It's going to be Breaking Swipe and Knockoff, a more supportive set here, that also has access to Tailwind. So, what are you kind of making of this Roaring Moon's position right now?
It's a little bit awkward. With that much damage, it is possible that maybe Fake Out Surging Strikes does take off to take out the Roaring Moon, but it is very, very bulky, and I'm not convinced that it would. Something like a Fake Out in close combat definitely takes it out if you don't terastalize it. But another interesting little interaction I want to mention, and this is also going to come into effect with this Dondozo terastalizing, is that Terra Poison on the Dondozo gives it a resistance to those grass moves on the Rillaboom, and while Rafa's Rillaboom does have high horsepower, Bingjie's does not. So there really isn't any way for Bingjie's Rillaboom to punish this terastallization on this Dondozo.
I was thinking the exact same thing, especially because now you can go for the Breaking Swipe to drop the attack stat of both of these Pokemon. Doesn't necessarily matter for the Urshifu. It is if it is going to be going for something like the Surging Strikes, it's still going to be able to get those critical hits. But this Roaring Moon, it's still not super effective against it. So it's going to be able to take those really, really nicely. Once again, that bulk really paying off in spades here. But the U-turn, that is super effective. So that is going to be enough to get the knockout and also provide Bingjie with a way to switch.
I really like that cover there by Bingjie because, of course, if you do terastalize the Roaring Moon there to the Poison type, the Urshifu is going to be doing twice as much damage with the Surging Strike. So either way, you are KOing that Roaring Moon unless it protects. Gudra comes in, Yawn going into the Urshifu side, though. Had that gone into the Gudra, this would have been a very, very awkward position for Bingjie, but it does not. Worth noting, though, that does mean that we've confirmed no Cresselia on Bingjie's side of the field, meaning that if it does get put to sleep, the Gudra is going to have a lot of trouble getting set up and finding the KOs it needs before we end up hitting the timer.
And that was something that we were talking about even before getting into this game one, right? Is because of how, I guess, bulky this offensive team from Rafa really is, was he really going to be able to find a way to get enough damage down onto the Hisuian Gujar before it got a chance to set up? And I think we're starting to see how his approach really was into that Pokemon in particular. It's definitely the right bring to take into this matchup, but if you're not really affording it the time to set up, then it's way easier to chew through.
Another interesting thing to point out is that the fourth move on Specs Fluttermane is kind of all over the place. People just kind of throw a move there that you're never going to use except for in like 1% of situations. But Rafa's fourth move is Perish Song, which is a very effective way to break through this Gudra if he doesn't manage to get to chew through it with things like a Magma Storm. But I love the way that Rafa played this. He brought in the Flutter, which forces either a Protect or a Switch on that Urshifu, and then he just counters it by bringing in the Heatran instead. Just basically eating that Heavy Slam for free. Bingjie has another dead turn here while the Gudra does eat a Yawn, and this Heatran is now incredibly well positioned.
I mean, it gets all of its healing back from the grassy terrain. So it is still back to full here, even after taking a little bit of chip there from the. I guess I'll call it a tickle. It took a tickle from the heavy slam. I don't know how that means that this Hisuian Gudra is how heavy it is, but it didn't do enough. And now when you look at just the positioning for this Hisuian Gudra, it does not want to stay on the field because of the yawn. It has to pivot out, and this is really providing an opening here for Rafa to just really get some nice damage down or just put himself into a better board position.
This is such a good switch by Rafa as well. He's just reading all of Bingjie's switches very effectively. He knows that Urshifu is going to come back in, so now all of a sudden he has his Flutter Mane back in. Magma Storm connects here onto this Rillaboom. It's not going to go down, but the residual damage is going to add up. It looks like it's probably going to take 2 turns of residual here, which is maybe a little bit unfortunate. It would have been nice to be able to get that KO. Maybe even 3 after the grassy terrain healing. But the Flutter Mane, once again, applying so much pressure to this Urshifu. The Urshifu is Focus Sashed, so with a Detect, maybe it goes back to full here, but this is still just such a phenomenal position here for Rafa. It's 3v3, all of his Mons are full HP, and Bingjie just doesn't have a great way through any combination of the two that Rafa puts on the field.
It's going to be so tough because Rafa really has all of his bases covered, especially when you look at the way that they cover each's like strengths and weaknesses. You're absolutely right that it's going to be very difficult to get through. Well, here's maybe the answer to your question. As we do see this Detect from the Urshifu, this Fluttermane gets a chance to go for the Dazzling Gleam, which of course can't go through with Protect, but it is enough to be able to secure the knockout there onto the Rillaboom. But is this Grassy Terrain healing good enough to be able to get that Focus Sash back into play?
I think it has to be. I think, like, the Detect there makes very little sense unless it's going back.
Nope.
It's not going back to full.
It's not.
Okay, so an interesting decision there. Bingjie gives up the opportunity to potentially try to make a read. I do like that Rafa stayed in with the Flutter, so even if he hadn't protected, there was really not much that could have been accomplished there. But there is still Terastallization available as well. The Urshifu is Terra Grass, so it's going to be weak to a double up from like Dazzling Gleam plus Magma Storm. Like, that's a very good way to pick up this Urshifu. But it will survive that Dazzling Gleam and maybe be able to knock out the Heatran. But without the Mystic Water, is it going to get there? I guess we're going to have to find out.
This is the way to do it. So yeah, Terra Grass is activated and on the field here for the Urshifu on Bingjie's side, but it's the Dazzling Gleam that gets a chance to move first, and even though it's not super effective anymore, it is still going to take a significant amount of damage. That close combat is plenty to be able to get through this full HP Heatran, and so now that one's going to be down for the count. But that's just one threat. Rafa still has a few Pokemon in the back, but as you take this Heavy Slam too, that's just a double knockout here. And Bingjie, all of a sudden, off the back foot of getting that Hisuian Goodra Yond, is once again back into a good position.
Okay, so we're going into a very interesting endgame. That's a fantastic turn by Bingjie, obviously getting that double KO there. Surging Strikes and Close Combat, both pretty risky into a potential Dondozo switch in there. So there was a lot of things that could have gone wrong for Bingjie if there was a switch that he called incorrectly, but he calls that turn perfectly, and Rafa's considering forfeiting here? I actually don't think he's out of this game with Yawn and leftovers, but it looks like he did lock in the forfeit, so game 1 going to go the way of Bingjie off the back of one incredible read.
That was a huge read, and that really did swing the tides into Bingjie's favor. I think when you look at an endgame like that, it's just a stall fest, and maybe you just run out of time. There are so many ways that Bingjie in that position could just play towards the timer because he still has, I think, 2 or 3 Pokemon remaining. It's just going to be very difficult to either chew through the Dondozo or vice versa because of how well the Pokemon on Bingjie's side also are able to deal with those moves. Wave Crash and Heavy Slam by themselves, not very much. And when it's a solo Dondozo, it's not doing that much damage because it doesn't have the Commander boost. So I think that was smart for Rafa. It also saves us, so thank you so much for that.
That's true.
But yeah, it was a good identification, I think, from Rafa's side that endgame was going to be too tough to actually get the win for.
Very, very true. So going into game number 2, we're going to have to see what the adjustment is. Really, I think that really does just come down to Rafa played the game amazingly and then had one horrifically bad turn. So I don't think he needs to necessarily change things up too much, but we are going to be seeing a complete switch up here. Excalibur Roaring Moon coming in into a Rillaboom Urshifu lead. That Urshifu is so small. That Excalibur is so small. These are some tiny Pokemon. That is a gigantic monkey.
I think that's actually, yeah, I think it's more so that that's a huge Rillaboom. Wow, it's actually taller than everything else on the field right now except for that Roaring Moon. But I love the Baxcalibur switch up here. I think this was a really nice adjustment to bring. You're recognizing as well that maybe the Chiyu might not be in the lead. Also, maybe like Fluttermane, just not a problem right now. But this Baxcalibur is also Terra Ghost. So it's maybe you can do some like funny shenanigans with that later, but I would love to see if this could just be like a one-hit knockout here onto the Rillaboom.
It is kind of neat that you have that potential immunity to close combat. It forces Bingjie to think a little bit, where it's like every single
And
time you
fake
consider
out.
close combating in, yeah, or fake outing, is it gonna Terra? We do see fake out going into the Fluttermane switch in here, and Icicle Crash. This is going to do a lot of damage. It doesn't quite pick up the Rillaboom there, but close combat also goes into the Fluttermane. It's a
Wow.
great switch by Rafa. A lot of the time, players will be a little bit hesitant to switch out their booster energy user because you lose that boost permanently. But Rafa, willing to take that L on the booster energy for an amazing first turn.
That was a great first turn, and I think something else that this Roaring Moon doesn't really care about is the fact that it's been able to withstand a ton of hits from anything on Bingjie's side. So you might even just want to bank on some of that sustainability for later, where the booster energy, maybe you just have the speed control later on in the game, or you just know you're going to be able to ensure a tailwind at a certain point.
It's a great point you make as well, because that Roaring Moon has shown us the massive amount of survivability that it has. It doesn't necessarily need that speed booster to survive
No.
to get that tailwind up. You can just take the hits and then use it after the fact. So
Hmm.
that's a really, really nice little tidbit for that Roaring Moon, as Rafa once again going to take a good trade here, losing his Focus Sash, but picking up the Rillaboom.
Yeah, I think you're okay with that though. I mean, like you can go for something, I guess, like the Glaive Rush was like a really nice call out there, but I don't know. Maybe you also are in a position now where the Baxcalibur could just cycle through Protect, and you are still able to utilize that Focus Sash if it comes down to it. It's going to be the Chiyu that's in the back here, and this is actually really one of the Pokemon that Rafa would have liked to see here. This Baxcalibur is still, of course, not invulnerable. It's still going to be taking a lot of damage, but it's still able to put itself into a position where it has that priority Ice Shard to break the Focus Sash on the Urshifu side.
Yeah, that's a great point. This is a really difficult turn for Bingjie. Now he's gonna have a fourth Pokemon in the back. He can switch that Urshifu out if he needs to, but it's just gonna eat the Ice Shard. It's gonna eat the Dazzling Gleam. There's no universe where this Urshifu survives. That is one more Pokemon dealt with by Rafa. Great play.
Yeah, so that's the Rillaboom and the Urshifu down here. And the
Oh
overheat, it's just gonna miss the Baxcalibur completely. And so you're not even getting chip damage onto it. And now you're putting yourself in a range where you could very well just go for Protect and get that Focus Sash back as you get that full HP. But Bingjie still has the Hisuian Gudra in the back. The job isn't done yet here for Rafa's Pokemon.
Job's not done, but Ice Shard Dazzling Gleam may even pick up the GU from here. There isn't a ton that this Gudra can do. I mean, there's also a world where Rafa could try to pivot out the Flutter, bring it back in, and then click Perish Song for the win, but I think that's opening yourself up to too many different weird things that could theoretically go down, but that's not going to matter. Bingjie locks into the forfeit as we are going into Game 3. This has been a very, very fast set for Crest Gudra versus Dozo. I'm a little bit surprised. I don't know which way this game 3 is going to go. The series has already gone very differently than I expected as far as the way they're approaching the set. So let's find out how game number 3 is gonna shake out.
Well, let's get right into it. This is going to be the third and final game of this best of 3. We've already been gifted with 3 game 3s today, and hopefully this one will also deliver. We're seeing a big switch up here, though, on the side of Bingjie. It's going to be that Urshifu, but this is the first time that we are seeing that Cresselia make an appearance.
Something that I didn't mention about this Cresselia that's a little bit interesting as well is that it's Calm Mind Cresselia. This is a double setup team with those extremely bulky Pokemon on Bingjie's side. Calm Mind Cresselia, probably not going to see a huge play in this matchup. I can't imagine that Bingjie wants to spam a bunch of Calm Minds here. But Moonblast, as its attacking move, is doubly super effective into this Roaring Moon. So it will apply a lot of pressure. And there's Terra Fairy on the crest, too.
The Terra Fairy is really nice, even just as a defensive terrestrialization. Like, yes, you can absolutely use it for adding in a little bit more offense to the Moonblast, but you're still not going to be taking nearly as much damage from something like a knockoff, or even just kind of looking across the way at something like the Bax Caliber. It's going to be the Glaive Rush, though, right into the Urshifu. It's
Ooh,
not enough to be able to get the knockout, though. And so this Urshifu gets a chance to respond with a close combat, a clean one-hit knockout here into that Pokemon.
I don't think that went the way that Rafa expected it to. Glaive Rush is such a powerful move. Trick Room coming out, though, and hold on, was that Urshifu? Yeah, that Urshifu was actually slower than the Baxcalibur, so this is a very slow Urshifu. This is gonna get very weird. I have no idea what these speed tiers between Heatran and Urshifu are gonna look like here. Normally, you'd expect the Heatran to be slower, but you'd also expect the Baxcalibur to be slower. So I don't know what's about to happen in this turn, Rosemary.
Well, I was gonna say maybe there's a play for you to go for something like an Ice Shard into the Urshifu, but I feel like you can't necessarily leave yourself open to that because Ice Shard probably not enough to be able to pick up the knockout onto the Urshifu from this position. But the one thing that you know is going your way is the fact that this Cresselia does not have access to Ally Switch. So you're not gonna get up to any funny shenanigans on Bingjie's side from these Pokemon swapping places. But it still comes down to these speed tiers, but we don't even get a chance to see that regardless because this Urshifu is just going to protect and this Cresselia is going to get set up.
Yeah, I said we weren't going to see Calm Minds here, but with the Heatran coming in, it does make sense to try to boost up that defensive capabilities on that Cresselia side of things. Earth Power going into that Urshifu, trying to remove it. The biggest punish that there is for this Cresselia is a potential for Magma Storm residual damage that would
Mhm.
help to add up over time. So it's also kind of hard to see how he gets that up, though, because if the Ice Shard doesn't KO the Urshifu, that's just going to nuke the Heatran.
Yeah, I do think that that would be a very big problem. I totally forgot that this Urshifu has already taken a close combat drop. So maybe that is in range where something like this Ice Shard could pick up, but it's going to be Aqua Jet first from this Urshifu into the Bax Caliber, and there's no Ice Shard. It's just going to try to go for some raw damage, but this Moon Blast, oh my gosh, that
Oh!
Calm Mind boost, almost able to get the knockout there, but the Earth Power in response, and now we will get a chance to see this Bax Caliber move as well. But that was almost super devastating here. This Excalibur still gets to land this Icicle Crash.
The biggest takeaway there, I think, is just how pitifully low Cresselia's special attack is. That is a +1 Terra Fairy Moonblast into a Baxcalibur that is weak to Fairy, and it still doesn't pick
Yeah.
up. Even with the Aqua Jet damage on top of it, Baxcalibur has there is no universe where Bax should have survived that against any kind of real attacker. But Cresselia's offensive stats are just so paltry that it survives. Urshifu goes down, and now the Crest is down to less than half.
Listen. I know it's not a Fluttermane, but I think Fluttermane ruined all of our perceptions of just how good Fairy type damage could be. This Heavy Slam, though, into that protected Baxcalibur was hoping to pick up the knockout there, but it won't be able to. But you talk about this Cresselia being at under half HP. Well, not anymore.
Not anymore, indeed. But the Magma Storm is going to send it right back to about half HP. This is where the Magma Storm is going to really shine, because you have these two Pokemon that want to sit on the field for the longer the better, really. But if Magma Storm connects on both, you're talking about a lot of passive damage every single turn. Still, though, that Heatran weak to Body Press, that's something that's a little bit concerning as well. And the more Calm Minds go off, the more difficult it's going to be to deal with that Crest.
Oh,
But that's a big crit.
that's a huge crit because now that could very well be a roll for the Magma Storm to try to pick up. Heavy Slam in response is going to be able to knock out this Baxcalibur, but the Lunar Blessing is going to completely disregard whether or not that Magma Storm damage would have even been able to get the knockout there. It does leave an opening here for the Heatran to go for this Earth Power, but this Hisuian Gudra is so tanky, and it's even going to be able to get more HP back with the leftovers.
Still, though, the Cresselia is going to be very difficult to remove, but Trick Room is over. Fluttermane and Heatran being able to move here is a lot of offensive pressure. I guess one of the big questions is, can Fluttermane make this happen with like Dazzling Gleam plus Magma Storm? Like, is there a universe where that, or Dazzling Gleam plus Earth Power into the Gudra? Is there a universe where that picks up? Gudra has Protect. That's another thing to consider. But like you mentioned earlier, this Cresselia is not carrying Ally Switch, so at least one less consideration for Rafa to make.
You know that Cresselia would be a guaranteed knockout if you head into that direction because it cannot actually go for Protect. But the worry here is, like, do you feel like you would need to go for Trick Room in this case if you're Bingjie? You can also get a Lunar Blessing off. You also can't really hit it with a physical attack because it's carrying the Rocky Helmet, so you might not want to take Chip from that direction. But yeah, I guess, like, you're not really worried about that regardless because of the Pokemon that you have on Rafa's side. But still some things to consider of, like, speed control is something that you feel like is valuable to Bingjie.
I do like this decision that we've seen out of Rafa. He's locking the super effective Flash Cannon into the Cresselia, and he's terastallizing away Fluttermane's weakness to Heavy Slam that will allow it to survive a Heavy Slam from Gudra. The big question here is Flash Cannon against a Fairy type from this range should pick up. But Cresselia's +1. Does it survive the Flash Cannon with that +1 boost? And if it follows up with a Lunar Blessing, then this gets very weird again for the next turn.
Isn't there still Magma Storm damage, or am I, like, misremembering? It doesn't
Well,
really matter
yeah.
because it does just get knocked out, but it was still on the table as a question.
Yeah, so Magma Storm off the table now. Is that just the Gudra left, or does Bingjie have one more Pokemon? Because if
Well,
it's just...
It is. I believe that's the last one because we saw the Rillaboom. I was gonna say I thought we saw the Urshifu and the it was the Urshifu. There was no Rillaboom on this in this game, so it is gonna be that Chi-Yu that's gonna be the fourth and final.
All right, the Chi-Yu here doing more harm than good for Bingjie, at least on the Gudra side of things. Gudra is a sitting duck here without a Double Protect. However, Double Protect, we've already seen it pay off big in the previous set. There's also the possibility for Dark Pulse flinches on this Heatran. There's a lot of things that could still go wrong here for Rafa. He's in the driver's seat. This is Rafa's game to lose. But Bingjie has outs to play to. No Double Protect, that is a sacrifice on this Gudra. It's definitely going to be going down unless we see a Dark Pulse. Oh, well, I guess there's no Dark Pulse flinch here. For now, though, Fluttermane is going to go down.
Well, you've got the KO onto the Fluttermane, and at least you're looking at this Chi-Yu having Life Orb, so you could go for the Dark Pulse in the next turn. But this Hisuian Gudra does get a chance to potentially move here. As I say that, though, it is still going to be slower than this Heatran, so it does get just knocked out. Now it's just going to be down to this 1v1 where you've gifted over a Flash Fire boost here to this Heatran.
I can't imagine Heatran going for Magma Storm here, so I do understand, like, Bingjie doesn't really care too much about the Flash Fire, but you're basically just saying you need Dark Pulse flinches here. This is a bulkier Heatran. It has Citrus Berry. One Dark Pulse is not going to pick up. There's even a world where maybe he needs 3 with the Citrus Berry.
Ooh.
That does 115-ish.
That will be a 3-hit. With the Citrus Berry, I think.
Yes,
it's going to be about a 3-hit, basically, with rolls, but it doesn't matter.
Oh, okay. So it comes down to a crit. The Dark Pulse needs to crit. The Life Orb recoil will remove the Chi-Yu from play, so it has to crit.
Does it crit? Dark Pulse goes through into the Heatran. It's going to survive on 9 HP. Oh my goodness, that actually might have been a roll to be able to pick up there, but it's just going to be the Life Orb recoil that seals the deal. And Rafa going to get a win on the board here for Team Spain.